Hello and welcome once again to the Astrology of Family, Karma, and Relationships podcast. I'm your host, Alexandra Mallon, and today I'll be talking about why is 2025 a year of major revolution and evolution, as it certainly appears to be. We are all going through so much these days. Let's try and get into some information here. So this is a year of change. We all see it. It happened, I think, obviously, right as we had the inauguration of our President Trump for his second go around. But before we get deeper into it, I always want to say that we are a new podcast, fairly new, and definitely please do go to Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Please subscribe and follow. That would help a great deal for those computer algorithms to find me out there so others can join in. So, as astronomers, our focus is to study the nature of cycles, to review these complex cycles that are coincident with astronomical cycles and our human experience. The one thing that oftentimes we forget as astrologers when we're looking at a two-dimensional screen is that we are all part of this galactic spin. We're all part of this change, these cycles of nature, these rising and settings of the sun, and the change of seasons from winter to spring, spring to summer, and so forth. So it's important to remember that we're looking at complex, interwoven, interrelational cycles that are not easy to understand. It's one reason that modern science has not been able to get on board with the idea that astrology has any kind of particular merit. So why is this year astrologically a year of a revolution and evolution, 2025? Well, perhaps some would say the number one thing, the first major event of the year, Pluto into Aquarius. That we have Pluto going into a new sign. And every time Pluto goes into a new sign, its orbit around the sun, 248 years. So every time that Pluto goes into a new sign, there is a new generational shift. So we can go back to Pluto Cancer generation, 1912 into 1939, the greatest generation, the generation of World War I and World War II. The Leo generation, Pluto going into Leo, 1937 through 58. The baby boomers generation, particularly. And then kind of baby boomers too, some say, 1956 to 72. Those baby boomer post-war World War II, post-Korean War babies were a sudden burst on the scene. And a lot of us now who were born in the 50s, 60s, 60s in my case, are coming of age and getting older. So we see people retiring. And we see in our nation the financial challenge of supporting people who've worked all their lives and now go to retire and require and sort of rather count on Social Security earnings. Then we had, of course, 1971 through 1984, Gen X, followed by Pluto going into, that was Pluto Libra, by the way. Pluto going into Scorpio, 1983, 1995. So Pluto, it's about major beginnings. Think about each of these signs: Cancer, home and family; Leo, the sense of self; Virgo, health and nutrition and diet and gyms and working out; the wellness of our environment; Earth Day; Libra, Pluto into Libra, major sweeping generational changes with partnership. Scorpio, known for what? Known for sexuality. And Pluto in 1983 through 95, that was the AIDS epidemic. Pluto Sag, 1995 through 2008. Sagittarius is that time of the year that's about the winter solstice, and celebrations, spiritual celebrations, religious celebrations, the idea of human spirit and spirituality. Pluto, major change, underground change regarding religion. That was the rise of the Middle East and uh, the rise of major political Western, Middle Eastern war and divisiveness. So perhaps some would say the highlight of this period of 2024-25 is Pluto ingressing or moving into the sign of Aquarius. As per the song of the 60s, it's the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And does that mean the age of humanity and people coming together? Aquarius is literally January, February. That's the month of Aquarius. And therefore, in the month of Aquarius, we have survival themes, the dead of winter, above the equator, the dead of winter, and survival themes. They say that Aquarius is an air sign, the element. The season of Aquarius is the blowing winds of the north. And so the winds of change, the winds of thriving and survival, you could say the middle of winter. If you're an Aquarian, Aquarians and Capricorns are known to be people who are focused on reality, what needs to be taken care of, what must be done, what's required for you to survive this wintertime season. That's all Aquarian stuff. And it really does have to do with those cold winds blowing. So the Aquarian nature is to think one's way through it, to prepare, to have the road flares in the car and the extra blanket in the car and the trunk, whatever, to be prepared. So Aquarius is a mental sign. It's about mental understanding and meeting challenges with intellectual comprehension. I tend to link it to the rise of AI. All of us now have a computer in our back pocket, an unthinkable idea in the previous generations, except maybe when in the middle of 1960, one would tune into a new TV show called Star Trek, where each person has their communicator. So these Pluto cycles, every 15 to 30 years, Pluto changing signs. It marks a generational shift, different generations. And now, as of 1983, Gen Y, we've gone from Gen Z, Gen X rather, to Gen Y. Some call it a crisis period. Gen C, 1995, a high period of technological breakthrough. Generation Alpha, 2008 onwards, an awakening period. And 2023, Gen Beta, an unraveling period, some historians say. And it certainly seems like we are in this unraveling period. Pluto's last cycle through the sign of Aquarius, which it has just entered now, happened in 1777 through 1798. The world's balance of power shifted massively. The American Revolution, French Revolution, and of course, importantly, with technology, the Industrial Revolution. So Pluto Aquarius last dealt with explosion of ideas and the explosion of concepts, scientific concepts. So I think we had the invention of telescopes and microscopes and microbiology and inventing new forms of medicines and drugs and new compounds that are totally human created. And this time around, we have AI. The second major event of this 2025 period, this year 2025, that is a banner year for change astrologically, the planets Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all together changing signs from yin, internal, emotional, to yang, action-oriented signs of the zodiac. Uranus, its nature, discovered in 1781, coincides with the discovery of the Industrial Revolution. Neptune's discovery coincided in 1846 with innovation in sciences in ideological battles. Particularly, you can think of the Civil War in the mid 1800s. You can also think of chemical compounds that were first invented that didn't exist in nature. So Neptune brings in things or coincides with things that are fully man created. Again, I think of AI. Pluto's discovery in 1930 coincided with a few years period of the discovery of plutonium and certainly an abundance of plutocrats. And right now, the planet Pluto in the US chart is in a significant place. In fact, Pluto has returned to where it was when our nation was born in 1776. We're having our first Pluto return. And whenever nations have Pluto returns or major Pluto configurations, there is major upheaval. So that astrologers back in the 30s, when they plopped Pluto into the US chart and said, what do you know? The entire body of the US chart has this planet, singular planet, opposite to it. It's kind of the extreme of the nature of the U.S., a Cancer nation, July 4th, that's about the home and family, the collective, in opposition to plutocracy or monarchy or controls or power domination themes. And since we're having a Pluto return to where it was when our nation was born, those astrologers of the 1930s said, will this American experiment continue, or will something happen to derail it? Well, we are in 2025 at a time when, certainly since Donald Trump's inauguration in January 2025, there's been an ultimate effort to break apart, to restructure at least the U.S. government. So 2025 has all these outer planets, meaning planets beyond Saturn, planets that are not visible to the naked eye, planets that were discovered back in the 1700s with Industrial Revolution, the invention of a telescope. So we've gone from inventing a telescope to sending, Hubble up into outer space, or the Webb telescope, which is 4 times the size of Hubble, into deep space to take photographs of our solar system and of our galactic system and other galaxies for that matter, other planets. So all outer planets are changing signs simultaneously this year of 2025. Pluto moving into Aquarius, Neptune moving into Aries, and Uranus moving back to where Uranus was when the United States was born in the mid 1700s. So we're having a Uranus return to where it was when we were born. Uranus moving into the sign of Gemini. So all these outer planets are ingressing, moving into air signs and fire signs. Fire signs of action, air signs of communication. You can sort of say, international actional communication. It's all a time of data wars and data information. That's another major situation, another major turning that is occurring in 2025. What's really notable, is Pluto, Neptune, and Uranus all have this kind of isosceles triangle relationship to each other. And astrology looks at these cycles of nature, these planetary relationships. We call them aspects in astrology. And those planetary aspects literally do coincide with energetic shift. There were studies back in the 50s and 60s to understand better radio communications and when there would be optimal or more difficult radio communications and radio microwave technology sharing. And it turns out that Jupiter and Saturn and its cycles to each other, as well as also these deep space, these planets beyond Jupiter, Saturn, that we cannot see, that they all definitely seem to have some relationship to communication. But that's another discussion for another day. In any case, this relationship of them being in a flow, think of a pyramid. Think of a pyramidal shape, a pyramid that lasts forever, where the energy is flowing or interspersed in a regular flowing kind of fluid way. All the energy of gravity in a pyramid is interspersed, so pyramids last and stand forever. So this relationship, this pyramidal relationship of Neptune, Pluto, and Uranus here, suggests something that changes radically the relationship of plutonium, plutocracy, energy systems, innovative systems, new energies, the Industrial Revolution, Uranus, and higher constructural, intuitional thought, that these things are all coming together in some unique way. This is the first major relationship like this with these outer planets that govern major societal, social, technological change. Their discovery is all around major societal, technological change. This is the first time that these planets have had this relationship in modern human history. The third major event that's occurring in 2025 that is unusual is what's called out of bounds planets. Particularly the Moon and Mars and Jupiter are very particularly high out of bounds this year observationally. And here this graph tries to depict for us what that means. Sort of the zodiac and zodiacal planets, where the planets kind of orbit our sun in a planetary disk, kind of like that graph I showed you of a galaxy and its orbital motion around its galactic hub, everything in the universe has this galactic gravitational spin. Well, so do solar systems, including our solar system. So everything, all the planets orbit kind of within a sort of a plate, like a galactic plate, a solar plate, within sort of a realm of action. And that we call the zodiac, where we normally see the planets. But every now and then, due to orbital perturbances and shifts of orbit and Earth framework and frame of reference, some of those planets appear to be very high in the sky or very, very low in the sky. And we're having one of those years. Every 18.5 years, we have a very dramatic shift of the moon in its orbit, which I'll tell you about in a moment. But every now and then we'll have these planets in certain signs of the zodiac that place them particularly high or particularly low in the sky. So this year, 2025, we have the moon, as I'll discuss in a moment, particularly high overhead in some of its full moon apparitions. We also have Mars and Jupiter. Here, the first half of 2025, we have seen from really the fall, winter of 2024 into the beginning of 25, Mars and Jupiter being very high overhead at night. So back in December, January, from darkness till midnight, 1 in the morning, we had Jupiter and Mars way, way high overhead, almost exactly at the zenith, directly above our head. You could certainly say astronomically, astrologically speaking, that that planet seems to be putting on a show. You would imagine that the ancient astronomer and astrologers will look at that cycle of Mars and Jupiter and wonder, does it have some correlative to human experience other than or including that we're seeing it very brightly, particularly brightly and overhead, dominating the nighttime sky. Indeed, astrologers have found these out of bounds planets describe a personality or a character, a time period where the nature of these planets, based on their cycles, Mars a 2-year orbit, Jupiter a 1-year orbit, that these cycles correlate with major significant change. Jupiter cycles, by the way, correlate with its period around the sun, age 12, 24, 36. Jupiter cycles correlate with, for humans, developmental periods of goal seeking, goal achievement, goal successes. So when you go through a Jupiter cycle, age 24, age 12, I should say, age 24, age 36, etc. When you go through a Jupiter cycle, it's a time of societal awakening. It's sort of like you're growing into yourself at different phases of maturity and expressing those phases, those growth, those cycles. It's usually a time of sort of creative self-expression, let's say. Mars cycles occur for all of us every 2 years. Wherever Mars was in your birth chart will come back to where it was again every 2 years. And astrologers have found that Mars cycles coincide with career job restructuring. Since Mars, the glyph or symbol for it astrologically is a circle with an arrow, Mars describes action. It's sort of taking the spirit force, the energy force of being alive, and with will and willpower and directed understanding, directed concepts, directed goals, directing ourselves toward achievement. So we have, of course, Mars, loosely or generally called the god of war. Jupiter called Zeus, the god of all gods, the god that protects us and governs us and takes care of us, which is astronomically accurate. Jupiter, Zeus, is indeed in our solar system the planet that protects us and has enabled life to evolve. All the space rubble comes in, Jupiter gravitationally sucks it in and prevents it from coming to the inner solar system. So the ancients had it right tens of thousands of years ago when they called Jupiter our planet of protection. They call Jupiter the great god. So we have Jupiter, Zeus, high overhead, Jupiter overhead, that describes social themes of justice, and Mars, war and aggression. So in a way, since they are kind of near each other in the sky these evenings, Jupiter and Mars are close by each other. There's kind of a war regarding Jupiter themes, philosophy, philosophical, geopolitical concerns, ideas of law and justness, law and order. Indeed, we're really having those themes out of bounds this year, 2025. So Mars is in the sign of Cancer and Leo this first part of 2025. Jupiter is in the sign of Gemini, Cancer, 25, 24 into 25. And it deals particularly for those Cancer individuals, Leo individuals, Gemini individuals. It deals with themes of dramatic change. Let's keep in mind uh, Cancer is where these planets are moving through astrologically. The U.S. is July 4th, a Cancer nation. It suggests major movement for those Cancer individuals, including the U.S., who has a Cancerian chart. So out of balance planets, they're very, very high from our visual astronomical view, or very, very low. Here, Mars and Jupiter are very, very, very high in the sky this year. And those planets that are out of bounds act to reach beyond current establishment. Some say when the sun isn't watching, it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, when the planet goes out of bounds from its normal orbit around our sun, when it gets a little higher or lower in its orbital plane, so we see it much higher or lower in the sky, it says that that planet is kind of no longer under the dominion of the sun. The sun implying sort of our hub, our spiritual center. And when a planet is out of sight and out of connection with this hub, people who have these out of balance planets in their personal charts tend to be rule breakers, people who behave autonomously and independently. We find also people who are born during these time periods when planets are out of bounds. In this case, anyone born 2024, 25 will have Mars and Jupiter out of bounds, and the moon. We'll talk about the moon. These are extraordinary people. These are people who operate, sort of by a whole different, beat, a whole different drummer. So whether for positive or negative, these people who are born with out of bounds planets leave their mark on the world around them. I can think of two people right now, Donald Trump and Elon Musk, coming out of nowhere into the here to radically upend Western civilization in 2025. We have another event that most astrologers know nothing about. Although, as a backyard astronomer myself, it's one of those events all astronomers look forward to. And I've talked about it in another previous podcast. So this extra dimension is Saturn's ring plane crossing. Due to orbital perturbations and shifts, when Earth and Saturn are so sort of aligned just so to each other over a period of 15 years, we go through a cycle of seeing Saturn's rings wide open to our line of sight or edge on to our line of sight, ring plane crossing. These ring plane crossing events and wide open events tend to describe Saturnian extremes, and they do happen every 14 and a half, 15 years. So you can see in the graph what the Saturn will look like telescopically. Actually, through my telescope, these are not my photographs, but they're really good examples on a particularly good night of very still upper atmosphere. What you see over a period of a 15-year change, year after year after year. So this implies it's not just 2025 that has this ring plane crossing, although it's at its exact sort of disappearing rings event. It's a period in the years prior to 2025, and then 2026, 2027, and as the rings open up again. So the symbolization here is that when the rings are wide open, these are time periods of Saturnian stricture. Since Saturn is the planet of structure and stricture, these are times when that Saturnian principle of law and order and structure or habituated lineage, let's say, elders, elderhood, and those who have their ideas are in full swing. That happened for us 1915, 1929, 1944, 1959, 1974, 1987, 2003, 2016. We can think particularly of 1915 and 1944 when the rings were wide open, meaning stricture, structure, stuckness, or imposing authority. World War I, World War II. Those are pretty good examples of Saturn rings wide open. So what about 2025? Saturn ring plane crossing. 1774, the birth of our country and our nation, 1776. 1789, the French Revolution. So the American and French Revolutions, Saturn's rings edge on, constraints removed. I also like to think about 1936. Well, I should say, how about 1862, the Civil War, keeping slavery, maintaining a socioeconomic way of living and earning a livelihood. 1862, Saturn ring plane crossing, slavery and civil war, the fight to free slaves after hundreds of years of subjugation. 1936 was a Saturn ring plane crossing edge-on time. That was right when the Third Reich was truly gaining greater and greater power. That led to World War II, of course. 1950, Korean War. 1966, the Vietnam War, the middle of the Vietnam War, and when the U.S. entered within months of this, 1966, 1964, 65, 66, 67, when those rings were edge on. 1980, we got involved in the Middle Eastern wars with Saddam Hussein particularly. 2009, Barack Obama was elected president, and now 2025, Donald Trump president, and going out of his way to reconstruct, deconstruct the U.S. government. All of these years coincide with major geopolitical upheaval and change, and often these are time periods, ring plane crossing, when history has been set during these periods. The last, number 5, major 2025 astronomical event is this major lunar standstill. These lunar standstills occur every 18.6 years. They only occur when we are having eclipses or the north node of the moon, when we're having solar eclipses in the sign of Aries, as we just did in March, the end of March of 2025. And also 2024, when we had the solar eclipse move across the U.S. from Mexico. Think of the Mexican border issues, Mexico all the way up through Quebec into Canada. Think about the idea of Donald Trump wanting to have Canada be our next State of the Union. Little things like that. So these major lunar standstills only occur when there is a solar eclipse in the sign of Aries. It happens every 18.6 years. We can think about 2006, I believe, the last time that this major event occurred, and we had major shift, again, geopolitically. 2009, with Barack Obama being elected. 2006 was George W., and those Middle Eastern wars were full bore at the time. So these major lunar standstills, what they are astronomically is the moon rising as far northeast as it can and being super high overhead. It almost, in fact, it seems like above the zenith, depending on where you are. It might be appear to be really at your right at the overhead view. This is always a 2 to 3 year period, just like that cycle of Saturn, going through its changes over time. All cycles of nature happen long cycles over time. So this major lunar standstill is something that takes years to build and years to recede from. We are in one of those times of major lunar standstill, the moon being super high in the sky and super low in the sky. The next time the moon is particularly at an extreme this year, 2025, is June 10th, only days away from Donald Trump's birthday. And there is a coincidence of Donald Trump's chart where he is a Gemini sun and a opposite Sagittarius moon in his birth chart. In fact, Donald Trump was born during a lunar eclipse where the Earth's shadow covers the moon, you could say. The material issues of the material Earth overdue, place a shadow on the moon, one's emotions or family or a sense of emotional connection, that the physical earth and the material plane and the material concerns are more egoically identified with, and the emotional realm, the moon, disidentify with. That's a lunar eclipse, and that's when Donald Trump was born. And when we're having this major lunar standstill next, the first one was during inauguration month, January of this year into February of 2025. The next one is June, Donald Trump's birth month. That's the coincidence of it, folks. So Donald Trump's chart is activated this June during this next major lunar standstill, where the full moon is particularly super, super, super low. You could sort of say the full moon is giving us much less illumination, not illuminating. It's kind of earthbound. It'll be skimming the horizon line, earthbound. I think it's a nice metaphor for Donald Trump being born during a lunar eclipse where the Earth's shadow is covering the moon. Every time we have these major lunar standstills, we see a major shift in human connection. It's typically when there are extraordinarily high tides and floods and flooding events. We're having that 2024-25. That is the case. The ancients saw these lunar standstills and, of course, lunar events and solar events. We know of Stonehenge. We know of Callanish. We know of plains in the Middle East that hold standing stone configurations as well. Kind of the name is I've lost it obviously for a quick second here, but all over the world we have these standing stone arrangements, and it wasn't so much the sun setting or shifting from north to south, that is the vernal equinox or the summer solstice events or winter solstice events that we think of with Stonehenge. It was really these lunar standstills that were particularly important for the ancients because they knew those lunar standstills, the moon getting very, very high and very, very low in the sky, marked times of social and environmental change. So we are in a time period of those big five changes: Pluto ingressing, Pluto and Neptune and Uranus all having a configuration to each other for the first time, really, in modern human experience. A major shift that describes of sociological understanding, communication, sort of a one world experience, or the theme of where we are as one world with those outer planets. Saturn ring plane crossing, the lunar standstill. These are all phenomena that are extraordinary and all happening 2025 simultaneously. Each one of these phenomena marks a major societal, social period of grand change. And here we have 4 or 5 major, and there are others, of course, too, here in 2025, but we have 4 or 5 major themes that signify grand social change. So thank you for watching, everybody. I do hope to see you again. Please come back and visit the Astrology of Family Karma and Relationships podcast. Thanks for watching. See you again.